In the afternoon, when school was out, and the last one had left with his little dirty snuffling nose, instead of going home, I'd go down the hill to the spring where I could be quiet and hate them. It would be quiet there then, with the water bubbling up and away in the sun, slanting quiet in the trees, and the quiet smelling of the damp and rotten leaves and new earth, especially in the early spring. For it was worst then. I could just remember how my father used to say that the reason for living was to get ready to stay dead a long time. And when I would have to look at them day after day, each with his and her secret and selfish thought, and blood strange to each other blood and strange to mine, and think that this seemed to be the only way that I could get ready to stay dead, I would hate my father for having ever planted me. I would look forward to the times when they faltered so I could whip them. When the switch fell, I could feel it upon my flesh. When it welted and ridged, it was my blood that ran. And I would think with each blow of the switch, now you are aware of me. Now I am something in your secret and selfish life that have marked your blood with my own forever and ever. And so I took Ants. I saw him pass the schoolhouse 3 or 4 times before I learned he was driving 4 miles out of his way to do it. It was then that I noticed that he was beginning to hump, a tall man and young, so that he looked already like a tall bird hunched in the wagon seat. Sometimes I thought I could not bear it. Lying in bed at night, with the wild geese going north, and their honking coming faint and high and wild out of the wild darkness. And during the day, it would seem as though I couldn't wait for the last one to go home so I could go down to that spring. And so when I looked up that day and saw Ants standing there in his Sunday clothes, turning his hat round and round in his hands, I said, "If you've got any women folk, why in the world don't they make you get your hair cut?" "I ain't got none," he said. "That's what I come to see you about." "And make you hold your shoulders up. You ain't got none." I said, "But you've got a house. They tell me you've got a house and a good farm. And you live there alone, doing for yourself, do you?" "Are you going to get married?" I asked him. "That's what I come to see you about," he said. Later he would tell me, "I ain't got no people, so that won't be no worry to you. I don't reckon you could say the same." "No," I said, "I have people in Jefferson." His face fell a little. "Well," he said, "I got a little property. I'm full-handed. I got a good, honest name. I know how town folks are, but maybe when they talk to me, they might listen," I said. "But they'll be hard to talk to." He was watching my face. "They're in the cemetery." "But your living kin, they'll be different," he said. "Will they?" I said. "I don't know. I never had any of the kind." And so I took Ants. And when I knew that I had cash, I knew that living was terrible and that this was the answer to it. That was when I learned that words are no good, that words don't ever fit even what they are trying to say at. When he was born, I learned that motherhood was invented by someone that had to have a word for it, because the ones that had the children didn't care whether there was a word for it or not. I knew that fear was invented by someone that never had the fear. Pride? who never had the pride. I knew that it had been, not that they had dirty noses, but that we had had to use each other by words, like spiders dangling by their mouths from a beam, swinging and twisting and never touching, and that only through the blows of the switch could my blood and their blood flow as one stream. I knew that it had been, not that my aloneness had to be violated over and over each day, but that it had never been violated until Cash came, not even by ants in the nights. He had a word too. Love, he called it. But I had been used to words for a long time. I knew that that word was like the others, just a shape to fill a lack. That when the right time came, you wouldn't need a word for that any more than for love, pride, or fear. Cash did not need to say it to me, nor I to him. And I'd say, let ants use it if he wants to. So that it was ants or love or ants, it didn't matter. My aloneness had been violated, and then made whole again by the violation. I would think then that even while I lay by him in the dark, and Cash asleep in the cradle within a swing of my hand, I'd think that if he was to wake and cry, I would suckle him too. Ants or love, it didn't matter. Time, ants, love, what you will, outside the circle. And then I found that I had doll. At first I would not believe it. But then I believed that I would kill ants. It was as though he had tricked me, hidden within a word, like within a paper screen, and struck me in the back through it. But then I realized that I had been tricked by words older than ants or love, and that that same word had tricked ants too, and that my revenge would be that he would never know I was taking revenge. And when Doll was born, I asked ants to promise to take me back to Jefferson when I died, 'cause I knew that Father had been right, even when he couldn't have known he was right any more than I could have known I was wrong. Nonsense, Aunt said. You and me ain't nigh done chapping yet with just two. He did not know he was dead then. Sometimes I would lie by him in the dark, here in the land that was of my blood and flesh, and I'd think to myself, ants. Why ants? Why are you ants? I would think about his name until after a while I could see the word as a shape, a vessel, and I would watch him liquefy and flow into it like cold molasses flowing out of the darkness and into the vessel, until the jar stood full and motionless, a significant shape, profoundly without life, like an empty door frame. But then I would find I'd forgotten the name of the jar. I would say to myself, the shape of my body, where I used to be a virgin, is in the shape of a... And I couldn't think ants. I couldn't remember ants. It was not that I could think of myself as no longer unvirgin, because I was 3 now. And when I would think Cash and Doll in that way until their names would die and solidify into a shape and then fade away, I'd say, all right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you call them. And so when Cora Tull would tell me that I was not a true mother, I would think how words go straight up in a thin line, quick and harmless, and how terribly doing goes along the earth, clinging to it, so that after a while the two lines are too far apart for the same person to straddle from one to the other, and that sin and love and fear, they're just sounds that people who never sinned, no loved, no feared have for what they never had and cannot have until they forget the words. Like Cora, who could never even cook, she would tell me what I owed to my children and to aunts and to God. I gave aunts the children. I did not ask for them. I did not even ask him for what he could have given me. Not aunts. That was my duty to him, to not ask that, and that duty I fulfilled. I would let him be the shape and echo of his word. And then he died. He did not know he was dead. While I lay by him in the dark, here in the dark land, talking of God's love and his beauty and his sin, here in the dark voicelessness in which the words are the deeds, and the other words that are not deeds, that are just the gaps in people's lacks, coming down like the wild geese out of the wild darkness in the old terrible nights. I believed that I had found it. I believed that the reason was the duty to the alive, to the terrible blood, to the red, bitter flood boiling through the land. I would think of sin as I would think of the clothes we wore in the world's face, of the circumspection necessary because he was he and I was I. The sin the more utter and terrible, for he was the instrument ordained by God, who created that sin to sanctify that sin he had created. While I waited for him in the woods, waited for him before he saw me, I would think of him as dressed in sin. I would think of him as thinking of me as dressed also in sin. He the more beautiful, for the garment which he had exchanged for sin was sanctified. I would think of sin as I would think of the garments which we would remove in order to shape and coerce the terrible blood to the forlorn echo of the dead word high in the air. I hid nothing. I tried to deceive no one. I would not have cared. I merely took the precautions that he thought necessary for his sake, not for my safety. But just as we wore clothes in the world's face. And I would think then, when Cora talked to me, of how the high dead words in time seem to lose even the significance of their dead sound. My father used to say that the reason for living was to get ready to stay dead. I knew at last what he meant, and that he could not have known what he meant, because a man can't know anything about cleaning up the house afterward. One day I was talking to Cora. She prayed for me because she believed that I was blind to sin, wanted me to kneel and pray too. Because people to whom sin is just a matter of words, to them, salvation is just words too.